Scary telling.
It all started when my husband, David, began to hear the sound of raindrops hitting the rooftop at odd times of the day. At first, I couldn't hear anything, and I thought he was imagining things. But as the days went on, I started to notice that he was becoming increasingly paranoid and wouldn't leave the house. David would spend hours staring out of the windows, trying to see where the rain was coming from. He even started to feel the drops of water on his skin, which made me worry about his mental state. He started to barricade the windows and doors shut, claiming that it was the only way to keep the rain out. I remember the day when I woke up to find David standing at the window, staring out at the clear sky. I tried to touch him, but he recoiled as if he was being burnt by something. From that moment on, he refused to let me touch him and moved into our bedroom closet, claiming it was the only place the rain couldn't reach him. As the days went on, the sound of the rain grew louder, and David became more and more obsessed with it. He refused to leave the house and became increasingly paranoid about the rain. I tried to convince him that it was all in his head, but he wouldn't listen. One day, I came home to find him standing outside in the pouring rain. He was drenched from head to toe, and his eyes were glazed over. I tried to convince him to come inside, but he wouldn't budge. It was as if he was hypnotized by the rain. As the rain continued to fall, I became increasingly worried about David's mental state. He was barely eating or sleeping and was becoming more and more detached from reality. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to turn. Finally, I decided to reach out to a paranormal investigator. I didn't know if it would help, but I was willing to try anything to help my husband. I hoped that the investigator would be able to shed some light on the strange phenomenon that was happening in our home. In the end, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. The rain continued to fall, and David became more and more obsessed with it. He spent most of his time in the closet, refusing to come out even when I begged him to. It was a scary time for both of us, and I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I had to do something to help my husband before it was too late. As David's obsession with the rain continued, I became more and more concerned about his well-being. He spent most of his time in the closet, claiming that it was the only place the rain couldn't reach him. At first, I tried to convince him to come out and join me in the living room or the kitchen, but he refused. He was convinced that the rain was out to get him and that the closet was the only safe place in the house. I tried to talk to him about his fears, but he wouldn't listen. He just stared off into space, as if he was in a trance. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I couldn't just sit by and watch as my husband slowly lost his mind. That's why I decided to reach out to a paranormal investigator. I didn't know if it would help, but I was willing to try anything to help my husband. I hoped that the investigator would be able to shed some light on the strange phenomenon that was happening in our home. When the investigator arrived, they were sympathetic but skeptical. They listened to our story and asked a lot of questions, but they didn't seem to believe us at first. It wasn't until they heard the sound of raindrops falling on the rooftop that they started to take our concerns seriously. The investigators spent hours in the house, looking for signs of a haunting or paranormal activity. They set up cameras and recording devices to try to capture any evidence of supernatural activity. But no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Finally, after several days of investigating, the investigator came to me with a theory. They believed that our house was built on the site of a serial killer's murders. The killer had drowned his victims during a rainstorm, and their spirits still haunted the area, causing it to rain even on sunny days. I was shocked and terrified by this theory, but it made sense in a twisted way. It explained why the rain seemed to follow us wherever we went and why David was so convinced that it was out to get him. The investigator tried to perform an exorcism, hoping to drive the spirits away and end the rain. but it only made things worse. The rain became a torrential downpour, and the house started to shake as if it was in the middle of a hurricane. In the end, the investigator was forced to leave, admitting that they were unable to help us. David was more convinced than ever that the rain was out to get him, and he retreated further into the closet, refusing to come out even when I begged him to. It was a scary and lonely time for both of us. I didn't know what to do to help my husband, and I felt like we were trapped in a nightmare that would never end. After the failed exorcism, I was desperate for any kind of solution to help my husband. I was at a loss for what to do next when I stumbled upon an old newspaper article online. The article detailed the story of a serial killer who had drowned his victims during a rainstorm in the very area where our house was located. I knew it was a long shot, but I decided to reach out to a historian who specialized in the area's history. The historian was able to confirm that the area where our house was built was indeed the site of the serial killer's murders. I was shocked and terrified. It seemed like the pieces were starting to fall into place, and it was clear that something sinister was happening in our home. I reached out to the paranormal investigator again, and they returned to our home to investigate further. This time, they were armed with the knowledge of the serial killer's history, and they set out to communicate with the spirits of the victims. It was a tense and terrifying experience. The investigator set up equipment to try to capture any evidence of paranormal activity, and we waited in silence for any sign of the spirits. After several hours, the investigator picked up on a strange static noise on their equipment. They claimed that it was the sound of the spirits trying to communicate with us. The investigator set up a device that would allow the spirits to speak through it, and we waited with bated breath. Suddenly, the device crackled to life, and we heard a voice coming through the static. It was the voice of one of the killer's victims, and she told us that the rain was a manifestation of the killer's rage and that he was still haunting the area. We were terrified, but we knew that we had to do something to stop the killer's reign of terror. The investigator tried to perform an exorcism again, but this time they had a plan. They set out to trap the killer's spirit in a cursed object, which they would then bury far away from our home. It was a risky plan, but we had nothing to lose. The investigator performed the exorcism, and we waited with bated breath to see if it had worked. At first, it seemed like nothing had changed. The rain continued to fall, and David was still holed up in the closet. But then, slowly but surely, the rain started to lighten up. The sound of the raindrops hitting the rooftop became less frequent, and eventually, it stopped altogether. We knew that we had defeated the killer's spirit, and we were relieved beyond words. But we also knew that we had a long road ahead of us. David was still in the closet, and he was more withdrawn than ever. It was clear that the experience had taken a toll on him, and we didn't know if he would ever be the same again. As the days passed, the rain stopped, and it seemed like everything was back to normal. But things weren't quite the same. David was still holed up in the closet, and he refused to come out, even when I begged him to. I tried to talk to him about what had happened, but he wouldn't listen. It was as if he was in a trance, and nothing I said could snap him out of it. He was becoming more and more detached from reality, and I was becoming more and more concerned about his mental health. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a strange noise coming from the closet. It was a low, rumbling sound, and it was getting louder by the second. I got up and walked over to the closet, trying to figure out what was going on. When I opened the closet door, I was hit by a blast of wind so strong that it knocked me off my feet. I looked up and saw David standing in the middle of the closet, his eyes wild with fear. "What's happening?" I shouted over the roar of the wind. "It's starting again," he screamed. "The rain, it's coming back." I didn't know what to do. The wind was getting stronger by the second, and I could hear the rain starting to fall again. I tried to grab David and pull him out of the closet, but he pushed me away and retreated further into the closet. As the storm raged on, I realized that something was seriously wrong with David. He was becoming more and more detached from reality, and he was convinced that the rain was out to get him. I knew that I had to do something to help him, but I didn't know what. Finally, as the storm began to subside, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I opened the closet door and walked inside, trying to reach out to David. "What's happening to you?" I asked, trying to get through to him. "Why won't you let me help you?" He looked at me with wild eyes, and I could see the fear in his face. "The rain," he whispered. "It's drowning me. I can feel it all around me. I can't escape it." I knew that I had to do something, and I made a split-second decision. I grabbed David's hand and pulled him out of the closet, holding him close to me as the storm raged on outside. It was a scary and intense moment, and I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. But I knew that I couldn't just stand by and watch as my husband slowly lost his mind. As the storm subsided, David calmed down, and he seemed to be more present in the moment. But I knew that we still had a long way to go before he was back to his old self. The experience had taken a toll on him, and I didn't know if he would ever be the same again. In the aftermath of the storm, I knew that we couldn't stay in that house anymore. The experience had been too traumatic, and I didn't want to subject David to any more danger. We packed up our things and moved out of the house, leaving the memories of the rain and the killer's haunting behind us. It was a relief to be out of that environment, but it was also bittersweet. We had made a life in that house, and it was hard to leave it all behind. As we settled into our new home, I could see that David was starting to recover. He was more present in the moment, and he seemed to be enjoying life again. But there were still moments when he would retreat into himself, as if he was reliving the trauma of the rain and the killer's haunting. I knew that we couldn't just ignore what had happened to us. We needed to confront it head on, and that's why I suggested therapy. At first, David was hesitant, but he eventually agreed to give it a try. We found a therapist who specialized in trauma and started to work through the events of the past few months. It was a long and difficult process, but it was also cathartic. David was finally able to open up about his fears and his experiences, and I could see him starting to heal. As we worked through our trauma, we also started to make plans for the future. We talked about starting a family and buying a new house, one that didn't have any dark secrets lurking in its history. It was a hopeful time for us, and I could see David starting to come back to himself again. He was more present in the moment, and he seemed to be enjoying life again. Looking back on everything that had happened, I knew that we had been through a lot. We had faced our fears head on, and we had come out on the other side stronger than ever before. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one that we had taken together, as a team. And that was the most important thing of all.